In Terminal C of an international airport, weary travelers were about to face a nightmare they never expected. A routine Monday night of flight calls and coffee kiosks turned deadly when a biker gang roared through shattered glass doors, engines drowning out screams as they terrorized civilians. Chuck Norris wasn't your typical passenger. For decades, he had served as an elite military operative and martial arts champion, known for neutralizing threats with calm precision. Steven Seagal wasn't just another traveler either. He had been a covert counter-terror specialist, legendary for turning raw aggression into self-destruction with fluid mastery. When Razor's biker crew began hunting families among the gates, they had no idea they were provoking two men whose entire lives had been spent dismantling chaos. Seagal moved like water, dismantling riders without raising his voice. Norris redirected brutality with a flick of the wrist, each strike sparking fear across the gang. Together, their response triggered a chain reaction that would tear Razor's reign of fear apart. What began as chaos in an airport terminal would become a reckoning. That night, Terminal C would never be remembered for flights. It would be remembered for the day two legends walked in and rewrote the meaning of fear. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The last call for Flight 2187 to Singapore echoed through Terminal C, its voice calm against the backdrop of evening travelers. Business people scrolled through phones, families huddled over carry-ons, and solo adventurers dozed in uncomfortable chairs, all unaware that their mundane Monday night was about to fracture. The first warning came as a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the polished floor. Heads lifted. Conversations paused. Then, the glass doors at the main entrance exploded inward. Motorcycles roared through the shattered entrance, 5, then 10, then 15, their engines drowning out screams as travelers scattered. Black leather, chrome studs, and skull insignias blurred under fluorescent lights as the machines cut violent paths across the terminal floor, sending luggage carts flying. At their center rode a man whose presence seemed to suck all oxygen from the room. Razor, 6'4" of bulging muscle and theatrical cruelty. His bike, larger than the others, gleamed with custom blood-red detailing. Unlike his followers who wore full-face helmets, Razor's face remained exposed, angular and scarred, with a trimmed beard that accentuated his perpetual sneer. He circled once, twice, then skidded to a dramatic halt in the center of the check-in area, killing his engine with practiced timing. The other bikes fell silent in sequence, creating an eerie, expectant quiet. "Ladies and gentlemen," Razor's voice boomed without need of amplification. "Welcome to the midnight show." A young mother clutched her son closer. An elderly man reached for his wife's hand. A teenager slowly raised his phone. Recording. Airport security personnel emerged cautiously from various positions, led by a woman whose shoulders remained square despite the sudden chaos. Evelyn Carter, her name badge catching the light as she stepped forward, placed her hand on her holstered taser. "Sir, I need you and your friends to exit the premises immediately," she called, voice steady despite the odds. Razor's laugh was the only response, a sound like gravel being crushed. He revved his engine once, the noise explosive in the enclosed space. "You hear that, boys? The mall cop wants us to leave." His eyes narrowed. "Make me." One of the gang members, massive, with a Viking-like beard, dismounted and strode toward a businessman's abandoned luggage. With theatrical slowness, he unzipped the case, turned it upside down, and shook. Clothes, documents, and personal items scattered across the floor. "Oops," the biker said, grinding the businessman's glasses under his boot. The act broke whatever restraint remained. The gang erupted into motion, tearing down flight information displays, flipping chairs, smashing storefront windows. Travelers fled toward gates or huddled behind counters. Airport staff tried vainly to protect civilians, while Evelyn shouted into her radio for backup. Razor dismounted with fluid grace, his movements revealing training beyond mere street fighting. He stalked toward the security desk, where a young officer was frantically calling local police. "It'll be 20 minutes before they arrive," Razor said, plucking the phone from the officer's hand and crushing it. "And we'll be long gone by then. But not before we've had our fun." He grabbed the airport announcement microphone, tapping it twice. Feedback shrieked through the terminal. "Attention, passengers!" he mocked. "Flight Get Fucked is now boarding. Anyone who thinks they're tough enough to stop us is welcome to try." He paused, scanning the cowering faces. "No takers? Didn't think so." Near Gate 12, a young father tried to shield his family behind a row of seats. A biker spotted them, revved his engine, and charged forward, scattering airport chairs like bowling pins. The father stood his ground, arms spread protectively, as his wife and children screamed. Evelyn Carter moved to intervene. But two bikers cut her off, circling her like sharks. She reached for her taser, but one of them snatched it away, dangling it teasingly. "Looking for this, Chief?" he taunted. "Why don't you try asking nicely?" Throughout the terminal, similar scenes unfolded. Security overwhelmed, travelers terrorized, chaos unchecked. Camera phones recorded everything, feeding Razor's performative cruelty. He lived for this, the spotlight, the fear, the control. At Gate 12, the father braced for impact as the biker bore down on him, engines screaming. His children's cries pierced the air. The mother grabbed at her husband's jacket, trying to pull him to safety. Then, a hand reached out from a nearby row of seats, weathered, steady, precise. It caught the charging motorcycle's handlebar with impossible timing, stopping the machine as though it had hit concrete. The sudden halt sent the rider flying forward, tumbling across the terminal floor in a tangle of leather and confusion. In the same row of seats, two men sat side by side. They had been there the entire time, unnoticed, unhurried. One wore a simple flannel shirt, jeans, and worn boots. His face was lined with experience, eyes clear and focused beneath a baseball cap. The other wore a black silk jacket over a collarless shirt, his long hair pulled back, features serene yet alert, like a meditation instructor who could also break bones. Chuck Norris and Seagal hadn't moved from their seats. They didn't need to. Not yet. Across the terminal, through the chaos of destruction and fear, Razor's eyes narrowed as he spotted the quiet scene unfolding at Gate 12. For the first time that night, his theatrical smile faltered. The terminal had transformed into Razor's personal arena, broken glass scattered like diamond dust across the floor, overhead announcements stuttering into silence as gang members yanked down speakers. Through it all, the sound of revving engines continued like mechanical heartbeats, punctuated by the crash of luggage and the staccato laughter of bikers enjoying their rampage. At Gate 12, Chuck Norris lowered his hand back to his knee after stopping the motorcycle. He didn't look at the fallen rider, who scrambled backward on the floor, stunned and disoriented. Instead, Chuck turned to the trembling family. "You folks might want to move behind the check-in counter," he said, voice soft but clear beneath the chaos. Nothing in his tone suggested urgency, yet it carried absolute authority. The father nodded gratefully, gathering his children. "Thank you," he began. But Chuck had already turned his attention back to the terminal center, where Razor continued his performance. Beside Chuck, Seagal hadn't moved. His eyes tracked each biker's position with machine-like precision, head tilted slightly, as though listening to something beyond the obvious noise. His hands rested on his thighs, palms down, utterly still. Been a while since we've had to deal with something like this, Chuck said without looking at his companion. Some lessons need repeating, Seagal replied, eyes never ceasing their calculation. Across the terminal, Razor had climbed atop the central information desk, his massive frame towering over cowering staff. He'd seized a security radio and was broadcasting his taunts across all channels. Calling all units? He mocked. We've got a situation at Terminal C. Too bad none of you have the balls to handle it. He crushed the radio in his fist, letting the pieces rain down on a security officer. Look at me, he demanded, grabbing the man's chin. Remember this face. Remember who owned this place tonight. Evelyn Carter had maneuvered herself between the bikers and a group of elderly passengers. Blood trickled from a cut on her forehead where one of the gang had thrown a luggage tag holder at her. Despite being disarmed and outnumbered, she maintained her position. This isn't a game, she called to Razor. There are children here. Elderly people. You've made your point. Razor's laughter echoed off the high ceiling. Made my point? Lady. I'm just getting started. He scanned the terminal, soaking in the chaos his crew had created. When I make my point, trust me, the whole world will know. Near a shuttered coffee shop, a teenage girl had been cornered by two bikers who were taking turns riding circles around her, closing the loop tighter each round. Her terrified face appeared in flashes between their circling bikes. No one moved to help her. No one except Steven Seagal, who had risen silently from his seat. He moved without haste, steps fluid and deliberate, navigating the debris-strewn floor with the ease of a man walking through his own living room. The chaos seemed to part around him, noise receding as he approached the circling bikers. The girl saw him first, his calm approach so incongruous with the surrounding panic that it momentarily distracted her from her fear. The bikers, intent on their intimidation game, didn't notice until Seagal was directly in their path. The first biker swerved at the last second, cursing. The second wasn't quick enough. Seagal pivoted slightly, one hand rising to catch the handlebar, while the other gripped the rider's wrist. In a motion too fast to follow, the biker was suddenly airborne, then crashing into a display of airport souvenirs. The first biker circled back, engine roaring in challenge. Seagal simply waited, hands now clasped before him, as though in prayer. When the biker charged, Seagal stepped aside with dancer-like precision, one hand shooting out to just tap the rider's shoulder. Somehow, that gentle touch translated into the biker losing all control. Bike skidding sideways into a trash can as he tumbled over the handlebars. Neither biker rose from where they had fallen. Seagal turned to the girl. Exit through the service door behind you, he said, pointing to an unmarked door. Staff will help you find a secure area. She nodded, wide-eyed, then fled through the indicated door. The brief confrontation hadn't gone unnoticed. Razor leaned forward on his perch, atop the information desk, eyes narrowing as he studied the man in black. Something in the fluid economy of Seagal's movements triggered recognition. Well, well, Razor called, voice cutting through the noise. Looks like we've got ourselves a hero. He jumped down from the desk, landing with deliberate heaviness. Boys, we've got a special guest. Bikers turned towards Seagal, who stood unmoving amid the wreckage of the coffee shop. Their engines revved in unison. At gate 12, Chuck Norris rose unhurriedly from his seat. No wasted movement, no dramatic flourish, just a man standing because the time had come to do so. He removed his baseball cap, set it carefully on his recently vacated seat, and began rolling up his flannel sleeves with methodical precision. A hush fell over the nearest travelers as they recognized the two men. Whispers spread. Is that Chuck Norris? And Steven Seagal? Holy shit, it's really them. Razor caught the changing energy, the shift in attention. His eyes darted from Seagal to Chuck, then back again. For a heartbeat, uncertainty flickered across his face. Then, his theatrical grin returned, wider and sharper. "You've got to be kidding me," he called out, voice booming with forced confidence. "The senior citizen action stars? This just keeps getting better." He spread his arms wide. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've got celebrities in the house. Let's give them a proper welcome." He snapped his fingers, and two of his largest followers dismounted, stalking toward Chuck with exaggerated menace. Three others revved their engines, forming a half-circle around Seagal. Evelyn Carter recognized the two men now, disbelief washing over her face. She had trained in martial arts herself. These men were legends. Their techniques studied and emulated by fighters worldwide. But they were also older now, and the bikers were young, strong, armed, and numerous. "Get those old men out of here," Razor commanded his crew. "Show them what real fighting looks like." Chuck finished rolling up his sleeves and centered himself, hands loose at his sides. His posture suggested nothing more threatening than a man waiting for a bus. But travelers who had been cowering now found themselves holding their breath, phones raised to capture whatever happened next. As the bikers closed in from both sides, Chuck and Seagal stood apart, yet connected by an unspoken understanding. Two different expressions of the same truth. Real power requires no announcement. The terminal fell silent except for the predatory idle of motorcycle engines. The confrontation had been set in motion. Razor crossed his massive arms, grinning expectantly as his men moved in for what he assumed would be quick, humiliating takedowns. He had no idea what was about to happen. The first biker reached Chuck Norris with a roar of challenge, swinging a heavy chain in a whistling arc. Travelers gasped, several turning away, unable to watch the elderly man get struck. The chain never connected. Chuck's hand shot up not in a wild, desperate block, but in a precise, almost gentle motion, and caught the chain mid-swing. For a suspended moment, biker and legend stood frozen in tableau, connected by the links between them. Then Chuck tugged slightly. Just a small adjustment of his wrist. The biker flew forward as though yanked by an invisible rope, his own momentum suddenly weaponized against him. As he stumbled, Chuck sidestepped and delivered a single strike to the man's solar plexus. A tap so controlled, it appeared almost casual. The biker crumpled, chain clattering uselessly to the floor. The second attacker hesitated, tactical caution suddenly replacing bravado. He circled Chuck, feinting left, then lunging right, with a combat knife that materialized from his jacket. Chuck remained centered, pivoting smoothly to track the threat without wasted motion. When the knife thrust came, Chuck didn't retreat. He stepped forward, into the attack, a counterintuitive move that momentarily confused the biker. With economy that bordered on mathematical, Chuck deflected the knife arm, locked the biker's elbow, and applied targeted pressure. The knife clattered to the floor. A second later, the biker joined it, face contorted in pain from a joint lock that immobilized him instantly. Two attackers neutralized in under 10 seconds, without a single showy kick or dramatic technique. Across the terminal, Steven Seagal faced the three bikers who had surrounded him on motorcycles. They circled like sharks, engines growling as they tightened their loop. Seagal stood motionless, eyes half closed, as though meditating amid chaos. The first biker charged, machine roaring straight for Seagal's position. At the last possible moment, Seagal shifted not a desperate leap, but a fluid step that positioned him precisely beside the passing bike. His hand shot out, fingers striking a nerve cluster in the rider's neck. The man went instantly rigid, then slumped over his handlebars. The bike continued briefly before wobbling and tipping onto its side, sliding across the terminal floor in a shower of sparks. The other two bikers attacked simultaneously from opposite directions, hoping to catch Seagal between them. He dropped to one knee, hands splayed on the floor. As the bikes converged on his position, he pushed upward with remarkable power for a man his age. His body rose in a controlled diagonal that carried him just above the passing handlebars. Both bikers swerved desperately to avoid collision, lost control, and crashed into each other in a tangle of metal and curses. When they looked up, Seagal was standing over them, expression unchanged. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Stay down," he said quietly. "It's easier that way." Across the terminal, travelers who had been hiding began to emerge. Phones recording, murmurs spreading. This wasn't movie magic or carefully choreographed stunts. This was something raw and real disciplined mastery. Dismantling chaotic aggression with surgical precision. Razor's performative grin had vanished. In its place, a calculating scowl spread across his scarred face. He had not expected actual resistance, let alone such efficient neutralization of his crew. He grabbed a nearby follower by the jacket. "Get the others," he growled. All of them. Throughout the terminal, bikers who had been vandalizing shops or terrorizing travelers turned their attention to the two unexpected threats. Engines revved in unison as they regrouped, forming a more coordinated approach. Some dismounted, drawing weapons chains, knives, even a crowbar wrenched from a maintenance cart. Near the security checkpoint, Evelyn Carter seized the moment of distraction to organize the frightened security personnel. "Get the civilians to the secure areas," she ordered. "Emergency protocols now." Airport staff began guiding travelers away from the confrontation zone, shepherding them toward exit routes and secure rooms. Families with children went first, then elderly passengers. Many resisted leaving, however, transfixed by the scene unfolding before them. Chuck moved toward Seagal with unhurried steps, navigating debris without looking down. They met in the center of the terminal, positioning themselves back-to-back without discussion, a defensive formation established through decades of training. "Just like Beirut." 87, Chuck said quietly. "I was thinking more like Bangkok." 92, Seagal replied, a rare hint of dry humor in his voice. "Less talking, more action," Razor bellowed from across the terminal. He pointed dramatically at the two legends. "20 grand to whoever takes down the old men. Show them what real fighters look like." 8 bikers converged on Chuck and Seagal, moving with more caution now, their earlier contempt replaced by wary respect. They had seen what happened to their overconfident brothers. One biker charged Chuck with a flying tackle. Chuck sidestepped minimally, redirecting the man's momentum with a subtle push that sent him sprawling. Another attacked with wild haymaker punches. Chuck blocked each strike with forearms like iron, then delivered a single, precise counter to the sternum that left the attacker gasping on the floor. Behind him, Seagal moved like flowing water, his Aikido training evident in every motion. He never met force with force, instead, channeling his attacker's aggression back upon them. A biker swung a chain. Seagal caught it and used the man's momentum to send him crashing into 2 of his companions. Another lunged with a knife. Seagal locked the attacker's wrist and applied pressure to a nerve point that caused the blade to fall from suddenly numb fingers. Throughout it all, neither Chuck nor Seagal appeared to exert himself. No heavy breathing, no dramatic grunts or shouts, no flashy techniques designed to impress onlookers. Just clean, efficient self-defense, executed with the calm precision that comes from decades of disciplined practice. The contrast with the biker's chaotic aggression couldn't have been more stark. Where Razor and his crew relied on noise, intimidation, and theatrical cruelty, Chuck and Seagal embodied quiet competence. The difference between those who need to prove their strength and those who simply possess it. A teenager who had been recording the entire confrontation looked at his friend, voice hushed with awe. "Dude, it's actually real. Everything they do in movies, they can actually do it." "Better than the movies?" his friend replied. "No cuts, no edits, no stunt doubles." Razor watched his crew being systematically dismantled, his earlier confidence crumbling. 7 of his men were already down, with the remainder growing increasingly hesitant to engage. He grabbed the nearest biker by the collar. "Get back on your bike," he ordered, shoving the man toward his motorcycle. "All of you surround them. Use the bikes." 5 bikers mounted their machines, forming a circle around Chuck and Seagal. Engines roared as they began to orbit, looking for an opening. Chuck and Seagal adjusted their stance slightly, remaining back-to-back as they tracked the moving threats. "Remember Akron?" Chuck asked without turning his head. "The warehouse?" Seagal responded. "Same principle." Seagal nodded, understanding the reference to a past operation. As the bikers tightened their circle, Chuck and Seagal suddenly moved in perfect synchronization. Each took 3 precise steps forward, then pivoted sharply. The maneuver put them directly in the path of 2 oncoming motorcycles, whose riders had to swerve violently to avoid collision. In the chaos that followed, bikes clipped each other, riders lost control, and machines went down in a tangle of metal and leather. When the dust settled, all 5 bikers were on the ground. Their motorcycles stalled or tipped onto their sides. Chuck and Seagal stood unmoved, having barely shifted position. A cheer erupted from the watching travelers, spontaneous and heartfelt. Some began chanting, "Chuck, Chuck, Chuck!" Others added, "Seagal, Seagal!" Razor's face contorted with rage. This was supposed to be his show, his moment of dominance. He stormed toward his fallen lieutenants, kicking one who was struggling to rise. "Useless!" he spat. "All of you." He turned to face Chuck and Seagal, rolling his massive shoulders. "Fine. If you want something done right." He strode to his custom motorcycle and reached into a saddlebag, retrieving something that made several onlookers gasp, brass knuckles that gleamed dully under the terminal lights. He slipped them onto both hands, flexing his fingers as metal creaked. "Let's see what these legends are really made of," he snarled, stalking forward. Chuck and Seagal exchanged a glance, the briefest communication between 2 men who had faced countless threats together. Their positioning shifted subtly, no longer defensive, but ready to engage directly. The real confrontation was about to begin. Razor stalked across the terminal floor, brass knuckles gleaming as he flexed his massive fists. The fallen bodies of his crew lay scattered behind him, some groaning, others ominously still. His theatrical showmanship had vanished, replaced by cold, focused rage. "You know who I am?" he demanded, voice dropping to a dangerous growl. Chuck Norris adjusted his stance slightly, a subtle shift of weight that practitioners would recognize as transitioning from defensive to offensive positioning. "Don't much care," he replied, voice level. "They call me Razor." He continued as though Chuck hadn't spoken. 10 years undefeated in the underground circuits, 27 men hospitalized. He tapped the scar running along his left cheek. "No referee to save you here, old man." Steven Seagal remained motionless, eyes half-lidded, almost meditative. "Pride comes before the fall," he said quietly, the ancient proverb hanging in the air between them. Razor's laughter held no humor. "Philosophy? That's your answer?" He addressed the watching travelers, who had formed a wide circle around the confrontation. "You're recording this, right? Good. I want everyone to see what happens to faded celebrities who think they're still relevant." The younger travelers had their phones raised, capturing every moment. The older ones watched with knowing expressions they remembered when these two men dominated action cinema. But more importantly, they knew the real training behind the films. Razor paced in a tight circle, like a predator sizing up prey. "You should have stayed in Hollywood where it's safe. This," he gestured at the destroyed terminal, "this is reality." Chuck remained silent, but his eyes tracked Razor's movement with laser focus, cataloging balance points, telegraphed tensions, potential weaknesses. "Nothing to say?" Razor taunted. "No witty one-liner for the cameras?" "Actions speak louder," Chuck replied simply. Something in his tone made Razor hesitate, the calm certainty of a man who had faced real danger long before film studios came calling. For a flickering moment, doubt crossed the biker's face. Then he masked it with exaggerated contempt. "Let's find out." Razor lunged forward with surprising speed, for his bulk brass knuckles arcing toward Chuck's temple in a blow that could have caused permanent damage. Chuck didn't retreat. He stepped into the attack, deflecting Razor's wrist with a circular parry that redirected the force harmlessly past his head. In the same motion, he delivered a short strike to Razor's floating rib, not dramatic, not telegraphed, just efficient. Razor grunted, more surprised than hurt, and pivoted to throw a left hook. Chuck slipped the punch with minimal movement, counter-striking to a nerve cluster in Razor's shoulder. The biker's arm went momentarily numb, fingers tingling. "What the?" Razor stumbled back, shaking his arm to restore feeling. Real concern flashed across his face for the first time. He hadn't landed a single blow, while Chuck had struck twice with surgical precision. Evelyn Carter had positioned herself near the civilians, keeping them at a safe distance while ensuring emergency exits remained accessible. Her tactical training allowed her to appreciate what others might miss. Chuck wasn't just defending himself. He was systematically testing Razor's responses, building a complete picture of his opponent's capabilities. Razor charged again, abandoning technique for raw aggression. He threw a flurry of punches, brass knuckles whistling through the air. Chuck weaved through the onslaught with minimal movement, letting the blows pass by millimeters from his face. He appeared unhurried, almost casual, yet impossibly precise. When Razor overextended on a wild haymaker, Chuck countered with a strike to the solar plexus that folded the larger man momentarily. Razor gasped, eyes widening in disbelief. He had never been handled so efficiently, so dismissively. "Lucky shot," he wheezed, straightening. "Let's see how your friend does." He turned suddenly toward Seagal, who had been observing silently. Razor charged like a bull, both fists raised for a devastating double hammer blow. Seagal didn't retreat. He didn't even assume a defensive posture. He simply stood, hands loose at his sides, watching Razor approach with clinical detachment. At the last possible moment, he executed a tenkan, the Aikido turning movement that placed him slightly behind Razor's charge. One hand rose to grip Razor's wrist, the other pressed against his shoulder blade. What happened next seemed to defy physics. Seagal applied minimal pressure, yet Razor's momentum suddenly inverted. Instead of smashing into Seagal, he found himself airborne, then crashing onto his back with bone-jarring force. The impact drove the air from his lungs in an audible whoosh. Travelers gasped. Someone applauded spontaneously. Razor lay stunned, struggling to process what had happened. He had attacked with full force, yet Seagal had barely seemed to touch him. The biker leader rose slowly, caution replacing recklessness in his movements. "That your best?" he taunted. but his voice lacked conviction. Chuck and Seagal exchanged a glance, then shifted position slightly. The movement was subtle, yet perfectly coordinated, like two players in a long-practiced dance. They now stood side by side, presenting a unified front. Razor recognized the tactical disadvantage. He backed toward his fallen crew, kicking one who was beginning to stir. "Get up," he hissed. "All of you. Get up now." 3 bikers staggered to their feet, bruised and disoriented. Others remained motionless, too injured to rejoin the fight. Razor positioned them alongside him, trying to regain numerical advantage. 4 against 2, he said, confidence returning. Better odds. Chuck's expression remained unchanged. "Not really," he said quietly. Something in his tone made even the watching travelers tense. There was no bravado in it. No challenge, just simple statement of fact, from a man who had faced worse odds, in places most people couldn't find on a map. Razor felt it too, the absolute certainty radiating from the 2 older men. For the first time, genuine fear flickered behind his eyes. He masked it quickly with theatrical rage, raising his voice to address the terminal at large. "Everyone watching? Good. This is what happens to has-beens who don't know when to retire." He charged forward, his 3 remaining followers close behind. The attack was more coordinated now, with bikers trying to flank Chuck and Seagal from multiple angles. Chuck stepped forward to meet the rush, hands rising in classic guard position. His movements remained economical. No wasted energy. No flashy techniques. Just ruthless efficiency. He blocked the first biker's punch, countered with an elbow strike that dropped the man instantly, then pivoted to catch the second attacker with a sweep that sent him crashing to the floor. Beside him, Seagal flowed like water around the third biker's attacks. Every punch met empty air, as Seagal seemed to anticipate each move before it happened. When the biker overextended in frustration, Seagal applied a joint lock that left the man kneeling, arm hyperextended, face contorted in pain. Razor, suddenly alone again, hesitated. The fear behind his eyes was no longer hidden. He looked from Chuck to Seagal, then at the watching crowd with their recording phones. His reputation was crumbling with every second of recorded humiliation. "Enough games," he snarled, reaching into his jacket. Metal glinted under the terminal lights, not brass knuckles this time, but the unmistakable shape of a switchblade. The blade snapped open with a sound that cut through the hushed terminal. Evelyn Carter moved immediately, placing herself between Razor and the nearest civilians. "He's armed!" she called. Unnecessarily, everyone could see the weapon. Chuck and Seagal didn't retreat. If anything, their focus intensified, postures shifting subtly to address the escalated threat. "Now we'll see what legends are made of," Razor said, blade weaving hypnotic patterns as he advanced. "Let's add some red to this picture." Chuck stepped forward, directly into Razor's path. His eyes never left the blade, tracking its movement with laser focus. "Last chance," he said quietly. "Put it down and walk away." Razor's answer was a vicious slash aimed at Chuck's midsection. What happened next occurred so quickly that many viewers later had to slow down their phone recordings to fully comprehend it. Chuck's right hand shot out, catching Razor's wrist in mid-slash. His left hand simultaneously delivered a nerve strike to the biker's forearm. The knife clattered to the floor as Razor's fingers spasmed involuntarily. Before the biker could react, Chuck executed a perfect wrist lock, forcing Razor to his knees. The terminal fell silent, except for Razor's pained breathing. He knelt before Chuck, arm immobilized in a joint lock that required minimal pressure to maintain but caused maximum compliance. The dynamic had completely inverted the intimidator. now humiliated before his earlier victims. "It's over," Chuck said, voice carrying in the silence. "You lost the moment you decided strength means hurting others." Razor's eyes burned with hatred. But beneath it lay something new. The dawning realization that he was completely outmatched. Not by superior strength or speed, but by something more fundamental. Discipline. Control. Mastery earned through decades of dedicated practice. "Who the hell are you people?" he gasped through clenched teeth. Steven Seagal stepped forward, expression serene. "Just travelers," he said, "who believe airports should be safe for everyone." Chuck maintained the wrist lock with one hand while retrieving the fallen knife with the other. He handed the weapon to Evelyn Carter, who had approached cautiously. "I believe this is evidence," he said. Evelyn nodded, accepting the knife carefully. "Security teams are 3 minutes out," she said. "Police right behind them." She studied the two men with undisguised admiration. "I trained in Kenpo for 8 years. What you just did." She shook her head, words failing her. Chuck nodded acknowledgement of her training. "Keep the civilians back," he said. "This isn't quite finished." Indeed, throughout the terminal, the remaining bikers were regrouping. Some had regained consciousness. Others had been playing possum, waiting for an opportunity. They moved with the desperate energy of cornered animals, grabbing makeshift weapons from the debris. Razor, still on his knees, saw their movement and a malicious grin spread across his face despite his compromised position. "You're outnumbered, old man," he hissed. "My boys are still going to tear you apart." Chuck released the wrist lock and stepped back, allowing Razor to rise. The biker rubbed his wrist, rage and humiliation warring in his expression. "Last chance," Chuck repeated, louder this time, addressing the entire gang. "Walk away. No one else needs to get hurt." Razor's laugh was ugly. "Oh, someone's definitely getting hurt." He looked at his scattered crew, who had formed a loose circle around Chuck and Seagal. "Take them down. Now." The gang rushed forward from all directions, and the final confrontation began. The bikers converged like a closing fist, some limping, others bleeding, all driven by wounded pride and their leader's command. They had abandoned any pretense of showmanship, their earlier theatrical cruelty replaced by desperate violence. The fluorescent lights caught the gleam of improvised weapons. Broken chair legs, luggage handles, a fire extinguisher wrenched from its mount. The smell of motorcycle exhaust mingled with sweat and the metallic tang of blood already spilled. In the center of the terminal, Chuck Norris and Steven Seagal stood back to back. Neither assumed an overtly martial stance. No dramatic guard positions. No showy preparations. They simply waited, perfectly balanced, breathing, steady. Two entirely different martial philosophies united in the calm certainty that comes from decades of disciplined practice. Chuck's eyes narrowed slightly, tracking multiple threats with the practiced assessment of a man who had faced worse odds in remote corners of the world. Beside him, Seagal's expression remained serene, almost meditative, despite the violence about to erupt. "Just like old times," Chuck said quietly. "Focus on civilians first," Seagal replied, his voice barely audible beneath the approaching roar. The first wave hit from all sides simultaneously, a coordinated attack born of desperation. A bearded biker with a neck tattoo swung a metal rod at Chuck's head in a vicious arc that would have fractured his skull on impact. Chuck's response appeared deceptively simple to onlookers. He shifted his weight slightly, raising his forearm in a precise angle that deflected the rod's path by mere inches. The deflection created a momentary opening that Chuck exploited with mathematical precision. stepping inside the attacker's guard and delivering a textbook strike to the solar plexus. The biker's eyes widened in shock as oxygen evacuated his lungs. He dropped to his knees, then collapsed forward without Chuck ever having to throw a proper punch. A second attacker, younger, with a wild mohawk and spiked leather jacket, launched himself at Chuck, with a flying tackle meant to use his superior weight and momentum as a weapon. Chuck sidestepped with such minimal movement that it appeared almost casual to untrained eyes. As the biker hurtled past, Chuck delivered a palm heel to the man's passing shoulder. The strike precisely calibrated to redirect momentum rather than cause unnecessary injury. The combination sent the attacker skidding across the polished floor, crashing into an already damaged information kiosk. Behind him, Seagal faced three attackers simultaneously, each approaching from a different angle. Where Chuck's style was direct and grounded in the no-nonsense efficiency of traditional karate, Seagal moved like flowing water, his Aikido training evident in every motion. He seemed to anticipate each attack before it materialized, shifting position with such fluid grace that the bikers appeared clumsy by contrast. The first, a hulking figure with a shaved head and arms like tree trunks, swung a chair leg in a vicious downward arc. Seagal didn't retreat or block directly. Instead, he stepped slightly forward and to the side, his timing so precise that he caught the makeshift weapon mid-swing. His grip on the chair leg became a fulcrum point, and with a subtle circular motion, he used the attacker's own momentum and body weight against him. The biker, suddenly off balance, stumbled forward. Seagal completed the motion with a joint lock applied to the man's wrist and elbow simultaneously. The technical complexity of the move was hidden beneath its apparent simplicity: leverage rather than strength, position rather than power. The biker found himself kneeling, arm hyperextended, face contorted in pain that would intensify with any further resistance. The second rushed in during this exchange, thinking Seagal vulnerable while handling the first attacker. It was a critical miscalculation. Without releasing the joint lock, Seagal executed a perfect tenkan, the turning movement fundamental to Aikido, that placed him at the attacker's side rather than directly in his path. As the biker's punch sliced through empty air, Seagal delivered a precise strike to a nerve cluster where neck meets shoulder. The effect was immediate. The man's right arm went limp, fingers splaying involuntarily as neural pathways temporarily short-circuited. The third biker hesitated, suddenly uncertain. That moment of hesitation revealed the psychological shift occurring throughout the terminal. The gang's confidence, already fractured by the earlier confrontations, was crumbling entirely in the face of skill they couldn't comprehend. The biker's eyes darted left and right, seeking reassurance or an escape route. Finding neither, he steeled himself and charged. Switchblade extended. Seagal waited, hands now clasped before him, as though in prayer, posture relaxed, despite the blade approaching his midsection. When the biker was fully committed to his attack, Seagal moved with surprising speed for a man his age. He sidestepped the thrust while simultaneously securing the attacker's wrist with his left hand. His right hand applied targeted pressure to the biker's elbow, creating a momentary pain distraction. The combination of pain and mechanical disadvantage caused the knife to fall from suddenly nerveless fingers. A quick combination of wrist control and subtle balance displacement sent the third biker tumbling into his already downed companions. All three now a tangled mass of leather and groans. Throughout the terminal, travelers had pressed themselves against walls and into corners, many recording with their phones. The confrontation had transcended ordinary violence, becoming something almost educational, a masterclass in the difference between theatrical aggression and disciplined combat efficiency. The stark contrast between the bikers' wild, adrenaline-fueled attacks and the calm, measured responses of Chuck and Seagal created a visual narrative more compelling than any choreographed movie fight. Do you see that? A young man whispered to his companion. Phone raised to capture the scene. No wasted movement. Everything has a purpose. It's like watching surgeons work, his friend replied. They're not even breathing hard. Near gate 17, a family of 4 huddled beneath seats, the parents trying to shield their children from the violence. A biker spotted them and advanced, chains swinging ominously. Before he could reach them, Chuck intercepted his path with 3 precise steps. The biker swung the chain in a horizontal arc. Chuck ducked smoothly beneath it, closing distance in the same motion. As the chain completed its swing, leaving the attacker momentarily extended, Chuck executed a textbook front kick to the biker's knee, not with bone-breaking force, but with enough focused energy to buckle the joint temporarily. As the man began to fall, Chuck secured his wrist and guided him to the floor in a controlled position that prevented further aggression without causing permanent injury. "Stay down," Chuck advised. Voice quiet but carrying authority. "Or the next one won't be gentle." He glanced at the family. "Service corridor behind you leads to secure areas. Go now." The father nodded gratefully, gathering his children and guiding them toward the indicated exit. Similar scenes played out across the terminal as Chuck and Seagal systematically created safe exit routes for trapped civilians while neutralizing threats with surgical precision. Across the terminal, Evelyn Carter maintained her position between the fighting and the civilians. Her tactical training allowed her to appreciate the extraordinary skill on display. These men weren't just defending themselves, they were controlling the entire flow of combat, dictating where and how the engagement unfolded to minimize risk to bystanders. Every move served multiple purposes: neutralize immediate threats, position for subsequent attacks, and always maintain awareness of civilian locations. "The exit's clear," she called to a group of elderly travelers who had been trapped near the luggage carousel. "Move quickly but carefully." As the group shuffled toward safety, Evelyn's eyes locked with Chuck's across the terminal. A moment of professional recognition passed between them, 2 trained individuals, acknowledging each other's priorities and capabilities. Chuck gave an almost imperceptible nod before turning to intercept another approaching threat. Razor, who had retreated to the periphery after losing his knife, watched with growing desperation as his crew was systematically dismantled. The carefully constructed image he had built, the invincible leader, the untouchable enforcer, was cracking with each fallen follower. His earlier confidence had evaporated, leaving naked fear in its wake. But fear, when cornered, becomes particularly dangerous. He spotted an emergency fire axe mounted on a nearby wall. With a snarl that was more animal than human, he smashed the protective glass with his elbow and wrenched the axe free, its blade gleaming wickedly under the terminal lights. Blood from his cut elbow dripped down the handle, but Razor seemed beyond noticing pain. "Chuck!" Evelyn called in, warning, spotting the weapon. Chuck had just dispatched another attacker with an economical combination that left the man dazed on the floor. He turned smoothly at Evelyn's call, eyes instantly locating Razor and the axe. His expression didn't change, no fear, no tension, just focused assessment. If anything, his breathing became more controlled, more deliberate, as he centered himself for the elevated threat. "Everyone back!" he called to the nearest civilians, voice cutting through the chaos with calm authority. Razor advanced with the axe held high, his massive frame seeming to expand with desperate rage. "Let's see you block this, old man," he growled, eyes wild beneath sweat-matted hair. Travelers gasped, some turning away, unable to watch what might happen next. But others, particularly those with martial arts experience, leaned forward. They recognized the calm calculation in Chuck's eyes and knew they were about to witness something extraordinary. Across the terminal, Seagal registered the new development without breaking his rhythm, as he redirected two attackers into each other. He began moving toward Chuck's position, but four remaining bikers blocked his path, forcing him to address the immediate threats before he could assist his friend. Razor swung the axe in a vicious overhead strike that would have split Chuck's skull had it connected. The trajectory left no room for error. A killing blow delivered with the full force of Razor's considerable strength and mass. Chuck waited until the last possible moment, allowing the axe to fully commit to its path. Then, with timing born from thousands of hours of practice, he executed a perfect 45-degree step that placed him just outside the axe's path. As the blade whistled past, embedding itself in the floor with a solid thunk, Chuck trapped Razor's wrist with his left hand, while simultaneously delivering a precise strike to the biker's elbow with his right. The strike targeted the ulnar nerve not with crippling force, but with enough focused energy to create momentary neuromuscular disruption. The axe clattered to the floor as Razor howled in pain, fingers spasming involuntarily. Before he could recover or reach for the fallen weapon, Chuck executed a textbook sweep that took the larger man's legs out from under him. The maneuver was deceptively simple-looking but perfectly executed, using Razor's compromised balance and significant body weight against him. Razor crashed to the floor with bone-jarring force. Chuck immediately secured him in a control position that rendered him immobile without causing unnecessary pain. A modified armbar that kept the biker's shoulder and elbow at mechanical disadvantage without risking dislocation. "Stay down," Chuck advised quietly, his breathing barely elevated despite the intense exchange. "You've lost enough today." Razor struggled briefly, testing the hold, then went still as he realized further resistance would only result in self-inflicted pain. For perhaps the first time in his adult life, he found himself completely controlled by another's will, not through superior strength or aggression, but through perfect technical execution and calm discipline. Across the terminal, Seagal had corralled four bikers into a corner through a series of fluid movements that seemed to anticipate their every attack. Rather than striking them directly, he had maneuvered them into a position where they were effectively trapped between luggage carts and the wall, their freedom of movement severely limited. The bikers brandished makeshift weapons, a belt, a broken bottle, brass knuckles, but their earlier confidence had evaporated, replaced by visible uncertainty. "The harder you fight, the more it'll hurt," Seagal told them, voice calm as though instructing students rather than subduing attackers. "Make the smart choice." Two immediately raised their hands in surrender, recognizing the futility of continued resistance. The others looked to their trapped leader for guidance, but Razor could only stare back in impotent rage from his controlled position on the floor. The psychological dominance that had held the gang together was broken, its fragments visible in the uncertainty spreading across once confident faces. Throughout the terminal, the remaining bikers began to recognize the futility of continued resistance. The chaotic energy that had fueled their rampage had dissipated, replaced by the sobering reality of defeat. Some dropped their makeshift weapons, others backed away, hands raised. A few made desperate breaks for exit doors, preferring the risk of escape to the certainty of arrest. A small child who had been hiding with his mother behind a row of seats peeked out cautiously, big eyes taking in the transformed scene. "Mom," he whispered, loud enough to carry in the sudden quiet, "are the bad guys gone?" "Yes, honey," she answered, eyes fixed on Chuck and Seagal with a mixture of awe and gratitude. "The bad guys are gone." The simple exchange seemed to punctuate the moment, the innocent clarity of a child cutting through the complex emotions swirling through the terminal. Throughout the vast space, travelers began to emerge from hiding places, their fear giving way to relieved murmurs and, in some cases, spontaneous applause. Chuck maintained his control hold on Razor, who had finally stopped struggling. Sweat glistened on the biker's face, but whether from physical exertion or the psychological weight of complete defeat remained unclear. His eyes, once burning with theatrical rage, now held the hollow look of a man confronting the collapse of his identity. "The authorities will be here soon," Chuck said, not to Razor specifically but to the bikers at large. "Anyone who's still here when they arrive goes to jail. Anyone smart enough to leave now might have a chance." It was an unexpected mercy, not legally sanctioned perhaps, but morally clear. The rank-and-file followers had been caught up in their leader's destructive charisma. Razor alone had escalated to deadly weapons. Several bikers took the opportunity, limping quickly toward exit doors. Others remained where they had fallen, too injured or stunned to flee. Seagal watched them go with impassive eyes, neither approving nor condemning their escape. "You're just letting them walk?" Evelyn asked, approaching cautiously. "The ones who matter won't get far," Chuck replied, nodding toward Razor, still pinned beneath him. "Sometimes mercy teaches better lessons than punishment." From the main entrance came the sound of approaching sirens, security reinforcements and police. Finally arriving. Evelyn squared her shoulders and moved to meet them, reclaiming her authority now that the immediate danger had passed. As she walked away, Chuck looked at Seagal. A silent communication passed between them, the shared understanding of two men who had faced countless confrontations together and separately throughout their lives. In that glance was the acknowledgement that their intervention had accomplished what was needed. Order restored, innocence protected, and perhaps, most importantly, a lesson delivered in the language of skilled physicality rather than empty words. With careful precision, Chuck released his hold on Razor and stood, stepping back, to give the fallen leader space to rise. The terminal had transformed completely from the chaos of an hour before the thundering engines silenced. The wild destruction halted, and in place of fear, a tentative calm emerging as morning light began filtering through distant windows. The battle for control was over. In its wake, something unexpected had bloomed. A renewed appreciation for the quiet strength that doesn't announce itself with noise and spectacle, but simply acts when action is required, then steps back when balance is restored. Dawn painted the sky in watercolor hues of pink and gold beyond the terminal windows. The night's chaos had given way to exhausted calm maintenance crews sweeping broken glass, police officers taking statements, medical personnel tending to the injured. The smell of industrial cleaners mingled with the lingering scent of motorcycle exhaust and spilled coffee, creating an olfactory snapshot of order being restored after upheaval. Gate 12, where it all began, was now cordoned off with yellow police tape. Two officers stood comparing notes beside an abandoned motorcycle that technical crews were preparing to remove. The bike, massive with custom chrome work and the gang's skull insignia emblazoned on its side, had been Razor's personal machine. Now it sat inert, front wheel slightly bent, leather seats slashed from some point during the confrontation. A crime scene photographer circled it methodically, capturing evidence from multiple angles. Around them, the morning's first travelers navigated the aftermath with curious glances and hushed conversations, their rolling suitcases creating rhythmic sounds against the freshly mopped floor. Airport staff guided passengers around damaged areas with practiced efficiency, as though directing travelers around temporary construction rather than the remnants of violence. "I heard it was 20 or 30 of them," a businessman in a charcoal suit told his colleague as they waited for coffee at a hastily reopened kiosk. "Complete takeover of the terminal. And then these two old guys just handled it." "Urban legend," his friend scoffed, straightening his tie. "Security and police took them down. These stories always get exaggerated." The businessman shook his head, unlocking his phone with a thumb swipe. "It's all over social media. There's footage. Indeed, throughout the terminal, travelers and staff alike were hunched over phones, watching clips that had already gone viral overnight. Chuck Norris calmly redirecting a charging attacker without appearing to exert himself. Steven Seagal flowing through multiple opponents with fluid precision. Razor's humiliating defeat at the hands of men twice his age. The footage, shot from multiple angles by stunned onlookers, had a raw authenticity that professional action sequences could never match. No cuts, no edits, no reset buttons. The hashtags were multiplying by the minute. Terminal justice. Real-life action. Airport legends. Quiet strength. News organizations were already reaching out to witnesses, offering payment for exclusive interview rights. In a quiet corner near a first aid station, Evelyn Carter sat on a plastic chair while a paramedic finished cleaning the cut on her forehead. Her security uniform was torn at the shoulder and stained with blood, some hers, some not. But her posture remained professional. Back straight, despite her obvious exhaustion. Dark circles rimmed her eyes after the sleepless night. Yet her gaze remained alert, tracking movement throughout the terminal with ingrained vigilance. "You should get this properly stitched at the hospital," the paramedic advised, applying a butterfly bandage to her forehead. 4 or 5 stitches would close it better. Evelyn nodded absently. "I'll get to it. After the debriefing." A senior police officer, Captain Reynolds, according to his nameplate, stood nearby, tablet in hand, reviewing preliminary reports. He was in his 50s with salt and pepper hair and the weathered face of a man who had seen everything the job could offer. "You'll need to file the incident report before your shift ends," he was telling her. "But the preliminary assessment is clear. Self-defense and civilian protection. Nothing to worry about from our end." Evelyn nodded again, wincing slightly as the paramedic applied antiseptic to a secondary cut on her cheek. Her thoughts seemed elsewhere, replaying the night's events behind her eyes. "Where did they go?" she asked suddenly. "Norris and Seagal. Have they given statements?" Captain Reynolds checked his tablet, scrolling through documents with practiced efficiency. No record of any statements from them. Transport manifests show they both boarded the 5:10 a.m. flight to Bangkok. Cleared security about 90 minutes after the incident concluded. They just left? Evelyn seemed genuinely surprised, turning her head despite the paramedic's gentle attempt to hold her still. "Apparently." The officer shrugged. "Not their first rodeo, I'd guess." Not their first rodeo. The understatement almost made Evelyn laugh despite her exhaustion. She had trained in martial arts for years, considered herself reasonably skilled third-degree black belt in Kenpo, regular competitor in regional tournaments, but what she'd witnessed last night was something beyond technique. It was mastery distilled to its essence. The difference between knowing moves and embodying principles. "Should we try to contact them?" the officer asked. "For statements, I mean. The prosecutor will want first-hand accounts for the case against the gang leader." Evelyn considered this, then shook her head. "I don't think they're interested in the spotlight. Besides, we have enough witness testimony and video evidence to prosecute." She gestured toward the dozens of travelers still reviewing footage on their phones. Probably the most documented incident in the airport's history. "Speaking of which," Captain Reynolds lowered his voice, glancing around to ensure privacy. "The leader Razor is asking to talk to you." Evelyn's eyebrows rose, her professional demeanor momentarily cracking to reveal genuine surprise. "Me? Why?" "Didn't say. Just that he had something important to tell you." The captain studied her face. "You don't have to speak with him if you'd rather not. We can take his statement directly." Curiosity overcame caution. After being cleared by the paramedic, Evelyn made her way to the makeshift processing area where detained gang members were being held before transport to central booking. Airport police had converted a staff break room into a temporary holding area, with officers stationed at the door and handcuffed bikers seated on plastic chairs along the wall. Razor sat separated from his crew, handcuffed to a metal support pole. His imposing frame seemed somehow diminished in the fluorescent light of morning. His carefully cultivated aura of menace stripped away. A butterfly bandage crossed his cheekbone where Chuck's precision strike had connected, and his right arm hung at an awkward angle, not broken, but strained from the joint lock that had neutralized him. "Officer Carter," he acknowledged as she approached, voice rougher than it had been during his theatrical performance hours earlier. "Security Chief Carter," she corrected automatically, stopping at a prudent distance. "You wanted to speak with me?" Razor studied her for a long moment, as though seeing her clearly for the first time. His eyes, bloodshot but surprisingly intelligent, took in her stance, her injuries, the way she carried herself. "I saw you last night," he said finally. "Standing your ground when my boys had you surrounded. That took guts. Most rent-a-cops would have run." Evelyn remained professionally detached, arms crossed. "Is that what you wanted to tell me?" "I have reports to file." "No." Razor leaned forward as much as his restraints would allow, wincing at the movement. "I wanted to ask you something." He lowered his voice, as though not wanting his followers to overhear. "Those two men, you train in the same, whatever it is they do, don't you?" The question caught her off guard. Evelyn had expected threats, complaints about rough treatment, perhaps attempts to negotiate, not genuine curiosity. "I studied Kenpo for 8 years, she replied cautiously. "It's not the same as their disciplines exactly. But there's overlap in philosophy." Razor nodded thoughtfully, eyes distant as though processing this information against his own experience. "Last night, when the old man Norris had me pinned, I couldn't move. Not because he was stronger." He flexed his considerable bicep for emphasis. "I've got at least 40 pounds on him, easy. But it was like he knew exactly where to apply pressure. Like he could read my body." He flexed his wrist, remembering. "I've fought guys twice my size who couldn't control me like that." Evelyn watched him carefully, trying to discern if this was some kind of manipulation. But Razor's expression held something she hadn't seen during the entire confrontation. Genuine humility. "What's your question?" she prompted, uncertain where this was heading. Razor met her eyes directly, the theatrical bravado completely absent. "Can anyone learn that? That kind of control? Or are they just born different?" The question revealed a vulnerability Evelyn hadn't expected from the man who had terrorized hundreds of travelers just hours before. She considered her answer carefully, aware that several officers were watching the exchange with undisguised curiosity. "It's not about being born different," she said finally. "It's about thousands of hours of disciplined practice, about approaching strength as responsibility rather than power, about mastering yourself before trying to master others." She studied his face, seeing genuine interest beneath the bruises. "Why do you ask?" Razor looked down at his cuffed hands, turning them over as though seeing them for the first time. The brass knuckles were long gone, bagged as evidence, leaving ordinary human hands strong but ultimately limited. "I'm looking at 15 to 20. Minimum," he said, voice quieter than before. "Aggravated assault. Weapons charges. Terrorism counts. Plenty of time to think about different approaches." The conversation was interrupted as officers arrived to transport Razor to central booking. As they helped him to his feet, he looked back at Evelyn. "Tell them thanks," he said, the words seeming to cost him considerable pride, "for not breaking anything permanent when they could have." Evelyn nodded, recognizing the significance of the request. If I ever see them again. As Razor was led away, Evelyn noticed something she had missed during the chaos of the confrontation. A small tattoo on the back of his neck, partially hidden by his collar. Not a gang symbol or threatening image, but Chinese characters. She recognized enough from her martial arts training to understand the irony. Discipline. Strength. Honor. Words that had become merely decorative rather than guiding principles. Across the terminal, near the International Departures Board, a young family huddled together on one of the few undamaged benches. The father, the same man who had stood his ground to protect them when the bikers first arrived, was showing his children something on his phone. His arm was bandaged where flying glass had cut him, but his expression was animated as he replayed footage of the confrontation. "See? That's the man who helped us," he explained to his wide-eyed children, pointing to a freeze frame of Chuck deflecting an attack with minimal movement. He stopped the motorcycle without even standing up. "He was strong?" the young daughter asked, leaning against her father's side. The father considered this question with surprising thoughtfulness, seeking the right words to explain what he had witnessed. "Yes. But not in the way most people think about strength. He was centered, calm inside himself." He glanced at his wife, who nodded encouragement. "Remember when those big kids at the playground were pushing everyone around last month? And how getting angry just made everything worse?" The little girl nodded, face serious with the memory. "Well, these men showed that real strength isn't about being the loudest or scariest. It's about being so confident in yourself that you don't need to prove anything to anybody." "Like Grandpa?" the little boy suggested, looking up from a game on his mother's phone. The father smiled, squeezing his son's shoulder gently. "Yes, a bit like Grandpa. Someone who doesn't need to prove anything because he knows who he is." Nearby, airport staff were setting up a temporary information desk to help reroute passengers whose flights had been affected by the night's disruption. A line had already formed, but the atmosphere was remarkably patient and cooperative. A stark contrast to the typical tensions of travel delays. People who had shared the extraordinary experience of the previous night seemed bonded by it, exchanging stories as they waited. "Did you see it?" a woman in business attire asked an elderly gentleman behind her in line. "I was hiding in the bathroom, but my husband sent me the clips. Absolutely incredible. I was by gate 16, the older man replied, leaning lightly on his cane. "Saw the whole thing. The way they moved. It wasn't like in the movies. It was, I don't know, elegant somehow. Efficient. My grandson takes karate lessons," the man continued, a hint of pride in his voice. "Been trying to get him to understand it's not about beating people up. Maybe I'll show him this footage. Seeing real masters might help him understand better than his old grandpa's lectures." "Think they planned it?" a younger man joined in. "Being here when the gang attacked?" The elderly gentleman shook his head. "Right place. Right time. Right skills. Sometimes the universe lines things up perfectly." Near the main entrance, where shattered glass doors had been temporarily replaced with plywood barriers, a news crew was setting up for a live broadcast. The reporter, a polished woman in her 30s named Rebecca Chen, checked her reflection in her phone camera before signaling her readiness to the cameraman. Her producer counted down with fingers 3, 2, 1, then pointed. "We're coming to you live from International Terminal C, where last night's dramatic standoff between a notorious biker gang and two unexpected heroes has become the talk of social media worldwide," she began, voice practiced and smooth. "Amateur footage shows action film stars Chuck Norris and Steven Seagal, yes, You heard that correctly, intervening when airport security was overwhelmed by more than 20 armed gang members led by underground fighting legend Marcus Razor Kelton. Behind her, cleanup crews continued their work, sweeping debris into large industrial bins. A maintenance worker carefully removed the last shards of glass from a damaged information display, while electricians rewired a security camera that had been torn from the ceiling during the rampage. Authorities have confirmed that Kelton and 12 of his followers are now in custody, facing multiple charges, including assault, vandalism, and terrorist threatening. Remarkably, despite the violence of the confrontation, no fatalities were reported, with injuries limited primarily to the perpetrators themselves. She touched her earpiece, listening to direction from her producer, then continued. The mysterious heroes themselves appear to have left the country on an early morning flight, declining interviews or official statements. But their actions have sparked conversation across platforms about the nature of real heroism in an age often dominated by performative displays of strength. The camera panned across the terminal, capturing the methodical restoration of order: janitors mopping floors, technicians repairing damaged information screens, baristas reopening coffee stands to serve the morning rush. Despite the visible damage, the essential rhythm of the airport was reasserting itself. Travelers moving through security checkpoints and gate agents announcing departures. As dawn breaks on a new day at this international crossroads, one thing becomes clear. Sometimes the quietest presence in the room can have the most profound impact. This is Rebecca Chen, Channel 8 News, reporting live. As the camera switched off, Rebecca's professional smile faded into genuine thoughtfulness. "Did we get verification on that Bangkok flight?" she asked her producer. It seems strange they'd just leave without any statement. Most celebrities would milk this for publicity. "Multiple confirmations," her producer replied, checking notes on his tablet. "Gate agent. Manifest records. Even a couple of passengers who recognized them boarding. Classic disappearing act." Rebecca glanced around the recovering terminal, her reporter's instincts sensing the deeper story beneath the surface spectacle. Maybe that's the point. Make the difference. Then fade away before the spotlight hits. "Philosophical today, aren't we?" her producer teased, but his expression suggested he understood her meaning. Near the security checkpoint, a group of maintenance workers had discovered something curious while sweeping up debris. A baseball cap. Ordinary in every way, except for what was tucked inside it. One of the workers carefully unfolded a piece of paper that had been placed in the cap's inner band. "What is it?" his supervisor asked, coming over to investigate the delay. The worker studied the paper, then handed it to his supervisor with a puzzled expression. "List of names, and a phone number with VA hospital written next to it." The supervisor examined the list, 10 names, in neat, precise handwriting. Below them, the note. "Veterans in need of assistance. Tours in Iraq. Afghanistan. Good men. Rough times. Contact Dr. Michaels." "Huh," the supervisor said, understanding dawning. "Must have belonged to one of those guys. Norris or Seagal. Should we call the number?" the worker asked. "Or give it to the police?" The supervisor considered this, then carefully refolded the paper and placed it in his pocket. "I'll make sure it gets to the right people. Keep sweeping." Miles above the earth, a commercial airliner cruised at 37,000 feet, engines humming steadily as it carried its passengers toward Thailand. Morning sunlight streamed through windows, creating patterns across the cabin's interior. In adjacent seats near the emergency exit row, Chuck Norris and Seagal sat in comfortable silence. Chuck had a paperback open on his lap, a biography of the Japanese swordsman Musashi, but his attention had momentarily shifted to the window, where dawn painted the clouds in breathtaking hues of gold and crimson. His weathered hands rested lightly on the book's pages, steady despite the mild turbulence occasionally rocking the aircraft. Beside him, Seagal appeared to be meditating, eyes closed, breathing rhythmic and controlled. A flight attendant approached with a beverage cart. "Coffee or tea, gentlemen?" she asked, not recognizing her passengers in the cabin's dim light. "Coffee. Black." Chuck replied with a polite nod. "Thank you." "Green tea," Seagal added, opening his eyes. "If you have it." As the attendant prepared their drinks, another passenger across the aisle leaned forward, eyes widening in recognition. She opened her mouth as if to speak, then hesitated, apparently reconsidering. Chuck met her gaze briefly and gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of his head, not unfriendly, but quietly requesting privacy. The woman nodded understanding and settled back in her seat, respecting the boundary. The flight attendant served their beverages and continued down the aisle. Chuck took a sip of his coffee, then turned slightly toward Seagal. "Bangkok," he said quietly. "Been a while." 10 years, Seagal replied, steam from the tea rising between them. "The temple should still be there. Master Chayuth mentioned renovations in his last letter, but the training grounds remain unchanged." Chuck nodded. They had history in Thailand training sessions with local masters, quiet pilgrimages to ancient dojos, experiences far from Hollywood cameras or public knowledge. Places where martial arts remained about personal development rather than entertainment or competition. "Think the kid learned anything?" Chuck asked after a moment, returning to his book but not yet focusing on the words. They both knew he meant Razor, not a kid in years, but certainly in wisdom. Seagal considered this, sipping his tea with deliberate appreciation of its subtle flavors. "Hard lesson. Whether it takes root depends on the soil." He set his cup down carefully on the small tray. But he saw something real, maybe for the first time. "That creates possibility." Chuck nodded agreement. In their decades of training and teaching, they had learned that true education begins with shattering illusions, particularly the illusion that domination equals strength. "The security chief," Chuck said, marking his page with a finger. "Carter. She has the foundation. Good instincts." "Noticed that too," Seagal replied. "Stood her ground despite the odds. Prioritized civilians over herself. Kenpo training. From her stance, solid basics. Western approach, but disciplined." Chuck agreed. "She was collecting bikers like chess pieces before we stepped in." These observations, precise, professional assessments of character under pressure, revealed how differently they saw the world. Where others might recall chaotic violence, they remembered specific decisions, techniques, moments of courage or hesitation that defined the human element beneath the surface drama. The plane hit a pocket of turbulence, shuddering slightly. Other passengers gripped armrests or looked up in alarm, but neither man reacted. Perfect balance wasn't just a physical skill. It was a way of moving through the world, responding to circumstances without being controlled by them. "Thailand first," Chuck said, returning to his book. "Then Malaysia?" "That's the plan." Seagal closed his eyes again, resuming his meditation. "Master Liang is expecting us next week. His letter mentioned a new approach to internal energy cultivation he wants to demonstrate." The conversation lapsed back into comfortable silence. Neither felt the need to dissect the previous night's events or congratulate each other on their effectiveness. They had simply done what a lifetime of training had prepared them to do. Restore balance, where chaos had temporarily gained the upper hand. Below them, the world continued turning. In the airport they'd left behind, videos of their intervention were spreading across social media platforms, accumulating millions of views and thousands of comments. News channels were interrupting regular programming to show the footage. Pundits were already debating the implications for airport security, civilian intervention, celebrity culture. But here, high above the clouds, none of that mattered. Two masters continued their journey, not running from recognition, but simply moving toward the next opportunity to learn, to grow, to refine skills already honed over decades of dedicated practice. Because true mastery isn't a destination that can be reached and claimed. It's a path that stretches endlessly forward, humbling even its most accomplished travelers with the knowledge of how much remains to be discovered. The plane banked gently eastward, carrying its passengers toward the rising sun. Dawn light filtered through the window, illuminating Chuck's weathered hands as he turned a page, hands that could deliver devastating force or gentle guidance with equal precision. Beside him, Seagal's breathing remained steady and controlled. His meditation a continuation of the same focused awareness he had demonstrated in combat. Different styles, different paths, united by a common understanding. Real strength doesn't announce itself with noise and spectacle. It walks in quietly and changes everything. And then, just as quietly, it moves on. Up next, we have two more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.